Okay, welcome to Chapter 6 review. It's going to be probably 15 minutes, and it's going to go quickly. I have the test sitting in front of me, and so I'm going to be flipping through the test and flipping through some notes I have on my desk to make sure I cover everything accurately and clearly. So if I pause, just know that I'm flipping through. So you're going to get kind of an insight into the test. So let's start. Let's start with territories and provinces. So we know that a territory is a political unit that doesn't have enough people in it. On the test, you will have to list the three territories. We know it's Nunavut, Yukon, Northwest Territory. And you will also have to explain why they are a territory. We know that a territory just doesn't have enough people in it, but why is there not enough people in it? So we're tying back the climate of Canada back into their political structures. And so we know that territories are territories because it's really cold up north and not as many people live there. We know that a province is similar to the United States, and so it's just a political unit. There's 10 of those, and so it's warmer in those areas than it is in a territory. Also remember that 75% of Canadians live on the border, so even as you get a little bit more north in those provinces, the population becomes sparse because, again, it gets colder as you move north. So 75% of Canadians live on the United States border because it's colder. Let's see. Economic activities for Canada. I am not going to make you describe which province/territory has what economic activities. I just ask you what are some of the economic activities in Canada in general. So you can really list anything you want from any of these territories and provinces. So we know that they have hydroelectricity because of all the water. We know that the St. Lawrence River allows for imports and exports through transportation. We know that they have natural gases, oil, livestock, all in the prairie. They have fishing. We also see that they have lead and timber, lots of timber, and minerals and forestry, so the timber. So you'll just have to list some of the economic activities that we see in Canada. Okay, so hydroelectricity. This is your hydroelectricity slide. I ask, why is hydroelectricity considered modification? It's considered modification because when Canada builds the hydro plants, they are changing the environment to fit their needs. They are changing the direction of rivers and waterways. They are changing actual environments by digging the really large holes so that they can build the cement and lay the cement. So there's a lot of modification that's happening when you are using hydroelectricity. Some of the upsides to hydroelectricity, why a country would want to use them. So this is our pros to hydroelectricity. It's going to remove the dependency on foreign oil, removes the need for fossil fuels altogether, creates clean resources that keeps the environment healthy. It's renewable. It's cheaper. We talked about that. Like creating the hydro plant is really expensive on the beginning side, but then to maintain it, it's really cheap. So over a time period, you're not spending as much money on it, so it's cheaper. But then some of the downsides to that, the hydro plants can harm the environment in the area. So as you are building, as you're modifying the environment, you're destroying habitats. You are making people move out of their areas because they are really large and they need lots of space. It can disturb the fish migration up and down the streams that they've built the hydroelectric plants in. If dam failure happens, it can flood the entire area, killing people and destroying more of the habitat. So we're seeing that as we problem solve, we sometimes create other problems. So we have created the fish ladders that help with the fish migration up and down the streams. We have the Inuits and the First Nations. I ask you to explain why the Inuits have to adapt, modify, and depend on for survival. They have to do this because their environment is so cold. They can't live there as easily as someone who lives on that U.S. border because it's not as warm. So they have to survive, they have to adapt depend, and modify. An example of dependency and modification is what I asked you, and I'm looking for specific instances, not just that they depend on their environment and that they modify their environment. I'm looking for specifics. So dependency is depending on the environment around them. So they're depending on the ice for igloos. They're depending on caribou for fur parkas. They're depending on intestines from seals and whales for those waterproof clothing. They depend on the hide or the fur to make tents. They depend on wood to make the actual skeleton of that tent, and then they put the hide over the tent. They modify their environments by creating igloos. It changes the environment. They modify their environment by creating sod houses, and they also modify their environment when in the summer when they put the tents up. That modifies the environment around it because it will actually change the environment. Once they remove those tents, the environment will look different from there on out. Okay, so let's move on to some of the, I don't really ask you any about these explorers, but I do ask you questions about Champlain and de Gracier and the women of France. So let's kind of talk about them. So my question on the test about de Gracier is, let me find it, explain the two ways Champlain, not Gracier, sorry, list the two ways Champlain helped France become an empire in Canada. So we know that he made that first permanent settlement for France and named it Quebec, and he was able to establish fur trade in France and Canada that helped France build that empire. So as he was killing the beavers and skinning the beavers, remember, he's sending that back to France, and France is making money off that. We also know that these women help. I asked the question a little bit differently on the test, so I want to tell you specifically how I asked it. Please explain how the women sent by the king helped secure French culture in Canada. So as he is sending women over, he's building the population up, and the population grows so fast, it doubles over that time span. And so they were able to build the population up to compete with the British population. And we can still trace back, 2/3 of Canadians still can trace back their ancestry back to these women. And so because those women were sent to France, the French population was able to build, and it gave a stronghold for French culture in Canada that we can still see today. So think of it backwards. What would have happened if those women did not come to Canada? Would we have the French culture that is there today? And the answer would be no. These women were able to create a stronghold of French culture in Canada, and they can still see that Canadian, that French culture there in Canada today. And then we have Gracier and Radisson. They, remember, they sell their plans to, sorry, I'm checking my test to make sure I've covered everything so far. So the question on your test for this, please explain how Gracier and Radisson upset the balance of power in Canada between French and Britain. So they were French. The French would not support their expedition to the Hudson Bay to find that new supply of beavers, but the British were able to. And so as Gracier makes it up to the Hudson Bay, he establishes the Hudson Bay Company, which is a beaver fur trade company, and he establishes it with the support of Britain. So it is a British fur trade, not a French fur trade. This allows Britain to establish a stronghold there in Canada, and it takes away the stronghold that France originally had. This also leads us to our 7 Years' War. So they both Britain and France want that fur trade there in the Hudson Bay, and so they fight the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War is going to be the ultimate loss of French power in Canada. So as Britain wins the 7 Years' War, that is the ultimate end for French control in Canada. So that ends it for them. So this is a good recap, literally, of everything I just asked. Some of all the questions, all the learning targets are on your test. Now, I don't always ask it exactly as it is listed. The words, the content is the same. The words just may be a little bit different. That's not to trick you, but to make you think a little bit deeper on that critical level. Anything that I changed, I have mentioned in this video, though. We talked about this already, a good recap. The actual timeline is not on the test. What I do ask, though, is please explain why Quebec was split into 2 provinces. Don't forget to mention the Revolutionary War. So we see that as the Revolutionary War is winding down and the colonists have won, the loyalists to the King of England are not welcomed there in the colonies anymore, in those northern colonies. And so they start to seek refuge or safety there in Canada, because now Canada is British. It's no longer controlled by the French king, but controlled by the British king. So those loyalists that were living in these regions right in here, your New England colonies, you'll learn that in 8th grade, they are moving into Canada because they still support the British king, and they're being persecuted down here in the colonies. So as we have more English-speaking British American colonists moving into Canada, it gives a division between languages. Now we have French and British language living together, and they don't get along. They don't trust each other. So the British government just divides what was Quebec in half, giving us Quebec and Ontario. Ontario is going to be your English speakers, and Quebec is going to be your French speakers. Still to this day, Quebec is still mostly French speaking. I also asked on your test, what are the 2 languages of Canada, and explained why they are your top languages. It's going to be French and British, or English and French. English and French, because those are your 2 original settlers, and as Canada is becoming more diverse, we still see those as our 2 top languages because it's the majority of ethnic groups that are living there.